Good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started here. So we'll go through some of the housekeeping issues again at first. For those that are watching this live, probably the best way to view this is go to the top right corner of your screen and pick the speaker mode. That way you'll be able to see the PowerPoint presentation easily. So I can see a couple of you guys. Just nod your head if I'm coming across clear and you can hear me good. Okay. Couple other things is I've got everybody muted right now. So if you've got questions, go down to the bottom of your screen, wherever it may be, and you can chat a question or hit the question mark and I'll see that. So the first thing we're going to do is, do you have any questions from last week? Okay, if anybody does have any questions, just you can type those in the chat and we'll get to those here in a little bit as we go along. Otherwise, we'll move right along to this week's class. This is going to be week 3. We've done chapter 4 this week. It's all about getting started, where to get your bees, how to get them into your hive, and the things you need to do the first few months to keep them going good. You'll have to bear with me tonight. I got a little bit of a tickle in my throat, but we'll get through this and we'll get going. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the bee yard itself. There's lots of different versions of somebody's bee yard, but where you place your bees is probably the most important part of getting started. So what is an apiary? It can be anything from a couple of hives, even a single hive. Maybe you've got a nuke to help get things started. Or you may have a much larger operation. Some of the big boys that have several thousand hives in Iowa have them spread out. It might be one location or it might be several locations. For instance, myself, I've got about anywhere from 15 to 20 hives, depending on the year. And I've got those spread out in 4 different locations. We'll talk about a little bit more later about why I do it that way. So location is a key to where you put your hive. There again, it all depends on what your goal is by raising bees. Are you looking for crop production to enhance maybe a garden, maybe some alfalfa fields or soybean fields? Or are you wanting honey production and you're wanting to place it close to alfalfa or a wildflower field to get that taste of honey? A lot of people don't realize that the flavor of your honey is dependent on what pollen they're bringing in from what plants, depending on the time of the year. So you can actually be strategic where you place your hives by the flavor of the honey that you would like to produce. So some people have questions about, can you have bees in town? You'll have to check your local regulations. Most places don't have regulations and will allow that to allow you to have those. I can tell you that Osceola, Iowa has no regulations and you can keep bees right in town. Yeah, Oscar's got a good point. You can also just keep bees for the conservation side of it to promote the pollination of plants in general, wildflowers, and just keep bees to keep their populations up as well. One thing about keeping bees, whether you're in town or if you have close neighbors, be considerate to them. Your bees are going to have a kind of a flyway going to and from the hive. So don't place your hives where they're going to be right next to your neighbor's area that they walk through quite a bit, because that's just going to create problems for you and them both. But you can actually be strategic of where you place your bees, and chances that your neighbor would never even know you even had bees. So the big question is where to locate them. What's the important factors on placing your bees and where you place your hives? Good sunshine is important. Usually I tell people a southern view or a southeastern view is probably the best if you can find that, because it's going to warm up in the mornings quicker. And then in the afternoons, it's going to get the shade, hopefully, if you have something behind you toward the west. But it's important for them to have a good sunny location. Even in the wintertime, this time of year right now, currently it's about 2 degrees outside. So whatever sun that those hives can get in the day time is going to be important because that's going to help them heat that hive up. The water source, this is something to be concerned about, but not necessarily one of the biggest factors, because your bees are going to be flying anywhere from 1 mile to 3 miles out in any direction. So chances are, especially here in southern Iowa, about any direction you go within 3 miles, you're going to have a water source. It doesn't have to be within 10 feet, doesn't have to be within a half a mile. They will find a water source. We even have some people that will take bird feeders, fill them up with rocks, and put water in there just to have a designated area for bees to drink. The thing about bees is once they pick a spot to drink from, that's going to be the spot they use. I have a small pond in my backyard, and there's only one spot in that whole area that the bees will use, and for some reason that's their favorite spot to drink from. So that's where they get their water from. A windbreak, to me, this is probably one of the most important things. It's probably more so important in the wintertime than it is the summer. Right now, if you can get any sort of a windbreak on those bee hives to protect them from that wind blowing around their hive, it's going to be a plus. It's going to help the snow build up from around the hive, but it's also going to provide some shade in the summertime and help those bees from getting too hot in the summertime. You'll notice later on we'll talk about bearding. When the bees start building up outside the hive, it's because it's too hot inside. It looks like they're trying to swarm and going to leave, but all they're doing is coming outside, kind of like us sitting on the front porch. They're trying to get out there and get a break from that hot hive inside. Flat and accessible, especially if you're going to be doing honey production where you're going to be pulling these supers off. Keep in mind the weight of these supers. You need an area that you can access easily. Depending on what you're capable of lifting and carrying a long ways away, you may want a spot that you can drive pretty close to those hives. That was one of the regrets I had in one of my locations. I placed some hives that were about 200 yards from the nearest road. So what I do now is plan accordingly when it's dry enough that I can actually drive through my yard to get to those beehives if I need to. And when I first placed them there, I didn't think that was going to be that big a deal, but it's come to be a major factor in my opinion on where I place my hives, being able to drive right up to them, load and unload stuff pretty easily. Avoid damp, humid environments. Moisture is just going to cause you problems. The drier the bees are, the less bacteria levels are going to be, and just overall your bees are going to be happier. So don't put them in swampy areas, obviously, or places that are low that absorb a lot of moisture, especially when they're trying to dry that honey out to a certain moisture level. They don't need extra moisture in there causing problems. We talked about hives facing kind of south, southeast. If you can do that, that's great. It doesn't have to be in some situations. I know you won't have that opportunity to do that, but in my opinion, almost every one of my locations, in fact, every one of my locations, my bees are either facing east or southeast and getting that morning sun as soon as it comes up. There we talked about paying attention to your neighbors and where you locate your hives, being considerate to them and educating where your hives are. It'll just cause a lot of problems down the road with them. Pesticide concerns, obviously, if you got somebody now, a lot of people panic, and we'll talk about this again the last week, but a lot of people panic when they see farmers spraying. Keep in mind, there's a lot of different sprays out there, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides. The ones that you need to be concerned about are the pesticides. They're the ones that can do damage to your bees. And all pesticides not necessarily are harmful to your bees, but they could be. So you probably don't want to put your bees right on the edge of a crop field that you know is going to get sprayed quite regularly, especially if they're spraying for aphids and things like that. Those could be harmful to your bees that are going out in those fields. We'll talk a little bit later in a couple weeks about the pesticide issue and getting on the registry so that applicators that do commercial spraying know where your bees are. I think we talked about that the last week, but we'll give you all that information then. Livestock concerns. Generally around here, the livestock won't be that big of an issue, but it has been known for horses and stuff to smell that sweet honey and just mainly just knock the hives over by accident, if nothing else. Large animals, whether they're cattle or horses, either one, rub up against these hives and knock it over. They probably soon regret it when the bees come out, but it's a big pain in the butt for you to have to go back and clean them up and create a mess. And if you're not aware of it right away, if there's a storm that comes up or something, you could lose your bees or they could swarm because those hives are knocked over. So obviously you wouldn't want to put them where there's going to be a lot of livestock next to your hives. So this is the picture I show. This is in my backyard. And what I usually do in the classroom is I have people tell me, what do you see about this location, good or bad? You guys are welcome to type in some comments and we'll stay on this just for a little bit, but I want to talk some of the issues about this. This area is facing southeast, just so you kind of have an idea, but what do you see good and bad about this location? If anybody wants to share or speak up, either one.
I think it doesn't have a shade for the summer.
Yeah, there's two things here. This picture was taken about 10 years ago, 10 years ago. And those cedar trees now have completely closed up. You can't even see this area in the back. This is all one big wall of cedar trees. So this over here is northwest. This is facing southeast. So I've got a really good windbreak in the wintertime. And I've got a really good sun spot in the summertime that shades this in the afternoon sun when it's hot. Close to water, yep, definitely. This is the pond in my backyard. And right over here in the corner, there's a little mud spot. And that is where all the bees like to congregate to drink water. I don't know why they picked that spot over the rest of them, but that seems to be the one spot they really go to. I know there's a shallow area. There's a nice mud flat that they get to land on. I think that probably has a lot to do with it. A couple other things I want to point out in this picture is there's the pallet here. This slopes off awful quick to the pond, but I've got blocks underneath this pallet to level it up. You really want to make sure you got a good, strong foundation to set those hives on. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but making sure you got a level spot. And then this grass in front of me, that's the area where I actually have to drive down to on the lawn. So I've got to coordinate and kind of plan ahead what the weather's going to do. Obviously, I don't want to drive down there if it's going to be muddy or something too. But another good point was pointed out that these pine trees, these cedar trees are going to produce a lot of sap. That's something that the bees are going to be looking for to create propolis. So there's a lot of things going on in this picture that I tell people, if you're going to raise bees, you're going to have to be a scientist and think outside the box sometimes and see, kind of give yourself the good and bad of each situation. I've probably learned more about beekeeping by doing things wrong than I have doing them right. So, which seems to probably be true with what we do in everyday life too. We always learn more from our mistakes than what we do when we do it right. A couple other things is this picture on the left over here, you see this really nice homemade stand they built. They're going to regret that when they have to start taking supers off that are going to be 6, 8 foot up in the air. Now, maybe they have a reason for that. Maybe they're in an area that's got some livestock or a lot of predators such as skunks and raccoons and stuff that like to get in these boxes when they're down low. But I would imagine when it comes to taking off these supers, looks like they got 2 of them on there right now, that unless they pull up there with a pickup truck and do it out of the back of the tailgate, they're probably going to regret having those that high. I prefer having mine lower. This is just a picture off the internet, but they're either just cinder blocks or nice solid foundations there. Does anybody see a problem with this hive right here? There again, I'm going to ask you guys a lot of questions tonight because I want you guys to be thinking and be the scientists here and figure out what's good and bad about some of these pictures. But I see an issue right here with this hive. Okay, somebody said low enough for skunks to get in. That could be an issue, which all these others are that low too. But the issue I see with this one, unless this picture is just kind of funny, somebody put the strap might be hard to get off. That's actually a good way to keep your lids from blowing off, is those tarp straps. I carry using myself some. It's crooked. Yep. The issue with this is, if you notice, it's tilted back, leaning back towards the back. If anything, you want it leaning towards the front, because any water or condensation that builds up and moisture that gets in this hive, if it rains, it's going to go back in the back here. And unless they've got drain holes in that bottom board or landing board, it's going to pool up with moisture. That moisture is going to create a problem, especially with hive beetles, wax moths. That's the damp, wet area that they thrive in, and that will cause you issues. I have personally seen a couple producers in this area lose hives because of that situation right there, that they didn't get it checked in time. And by the time they realized this was an issue, they completely lost their hive to webworms or wax moths. They just totally disintegrated that whole hive and took it over with making web all through there. So if anything, see how this one's kind of leaning forward? That will help that moisture drain out the front and it'll help your bees out tremendously. So as I go through these pictures, I just try to point out to you guys some of the things I see that are good and bad. But obviously, I think that one's going to be an issue. So when you're looking to place your apiary or your hive, look for any sturdy level foundation that already exists. Maybe you don't have to create it. Maybe there's an area where there used to be a grain bin and they no longer use it, or maybe it was a corn crib and they no longer use it. You have a nice flat concrete area to set your hives on. I know some situations here in Clark County that people use these. They work great. The nice thing in the summertime is this concrete heats up a little bit, keeps the hive a little bit warmer in the mornings. In late fall, you might have an old foundation from a garage or a building that was torn down, no longer being used. These make great areas to put your hives on. If you don't have either one of these, then some cinder blocks or pallets. Now, I have went to using all plastic pallets because I've had too many of the wood ones in about 3 years rot. And they don't just rot, and they slowly rot, but you don't notice it. And one day you'll come out there and your hive will be tipped over because the boards are broken and they've lost the strength and your hive's no longer sitting straight up and down. It's either tilted or completely fell over. So I've went to using pretty much all plastic pallets, which work out a lot better. Or I even make my own pallet boards, make them out of 2x lumber instead of the 1x lumber. And they last a lot longer. So one of the things that you need to do before you get your bees, after you pick your location, is to get your hive all assembled. If you've ordered a brand new one, it's probably going to come in pieces unless you picked it up in one piece. So you need to get all the tools ready. It's probably going to require some glue. It's probably going to require some nails, a hammer, and it might require a refreshing drink of your choice. When you're doing the frames, I glue my frames, plus I nail them from the top. This here's a nail just to support the rabbits on there. But it is important to glue all these. It makes them that much stronger and they'll last longer. And you have to realize when you're taking these frames out, I'll actually switch cameras here for just a second, and Rose can show you taking a Hive tool, and when you're prying up on these frames, so she's taking the outer cover and the inner cover off. Now this is a new hive, so they're going to pop up pretty easily, but grab one of my Hive tools and put that in there and to show how they're going to pry those open.
Hold on, I gotta find one that I like.
Okay, there's about 4 in there, so you should have your choice. So when these hives have got comb in there and propolis, they're going to be glued down, and you're going to put a lot of pressure to pop those open. And those little tabs and those rabbit ears get popped off if you don't glue them. Or what happens sometimes are you're going to pull that top bar off, and the rest of the frame is going to be down in there, and it's going to, if you didn't glue it and nail it, you pop that top board off, and you didn't actually pull the frame out. All you pulled out was the top piece. So there's another Hive tool. We'll talk about my bag there in a little bit about all the stuff we carry, but you can put a lot of pressure on those tools and popping those frames out. So by going back and gluing all that, you're going to greatly enhance the life of your frames there. Get back here to the so it's just talking about nailing them through there, getting them glued up, and they'll last you a lot longer. And that's if you have the new beekeeping book, that talks about that in the book. So the other thing I've seen people do is they go get their bees and they don't have their hive set up. So they have to wait to put the bees in to set their hives up. So make sure you have your place picked, make sure you have the right foundation you want, make sure your hive is set up with all the frames in it and ready to go. It is probably a good idea to put that together for maybe a day or two ahead of time and have that ready to go when you know you're going to put your bees in there. Now, it's probably not a good idea to do it several weeks in advance because you've created basically a cavern for bugs and stuff to get in there, and there are no bees to actually kick those out. So I wouldn't get too excited about getting it up several days in advance or weeks in advance, but a few days would be plenty good. For those that have hives right now, when this weather warms up here in the next week or two, hopefully, we're getting kind of tired of this no days above double digits. But when we do get a good 40, 50 degree day, go out there and just pop that top a little bit just to see if your bees are alive. If your bees are not alive and they died for some reason, or they absconded for some reason, meaning they left without any reason, you want to realize that ahead of time and not let that hive set empty all spring before you put your bees in there again. Because what's going to happen is the wax moths and the hive beetles are going to take over, and you're going to have a mess when you go back to open that up and put your bees in there. So hives that are sitting empty without bees can be just as much of a problem as anything else. So a couple things, we talked about them a little bit, but making sure your stand is level from side to side is a good thing. When you start adding supers up, the taller you get, if you don't have it level, it may tip one way or the other. And then let's say you pick a foundation like the old concrete pad somewhere that's completely flat and you need to tip your hives up just a little bit. You can put a small shim. This to me is a little bit too carried away here. It looks like a 2x lumber, but 3/4 inch lumber works really nice. This is a shim to give it just a little bit of a tilt forward so any moisture runs out. You can tip the hive itself, or when you're putting the pallet down, maybe you want to tip the whole pallet just a little bit. Either one of those is fine, but just give it a little bit of a flow, because the entrance would be over here on this left side. This is the side of the box and this is the back of it, but just a little bit of a flow so the moisture runs out. So now we've talked about our hives all set up. We've decided what type of bees we're going to get. We've made our order, and it's the day to go pick them up. We're going to talk about where to get your bees from. We're going to talk about how to get your bees from that place and how to put them in the hive itself. So we'll take that and break it down into 3 different steps. Getting bees, do you want to go with a package supplier? When do you want to get them? Do you want to go with nukes? Do you want to go with 3-pound packages? These are all things you have to decide. We'll discuss them tonight, and then you guys can decide what you think's best for what type of bees you're going to get. So first we'll talk about package bees. This is a 3-pound package. This is a wood box with screens on both sides. And then there's a brace in the center, and you can barely see there's a tin can in the center. And that tin can is going to have syrup water in it. And that's going to be the food supply for those bees while they're in transport whether they came from California or from a local producer or wherever you got them from, but that's their food supply. So one thing you're always going to want to check is to make sure if you're not going to put them in the hive right away, how much food syrup is in that can. You may have to replenish it. The other thing that's going to be in that box is there's going to be a queen cage somewhere, usually off to the side up here. A queen cage is going to have your queen in it. We'll talk more about that detail here in a little bit too, but that was the last 3-pound package I bought, and that was probably, well, this boy here is in college now, so it's probably been about 8-9 years ago. So here's a good picture of a wooden box. It's got the can of syrup right here. There's a little tiny, there might be a hole or it might be a cap with a cloth in it so the syrup water can drip down for those bees to eat. Typically, when you buy bees, you're going to buy a 2-pound package or a 3-pound package. And when we talked about setting your hive up, regardless of how much of the box you bought, all you need is that first deep. You don't need the second deep. You don't need the supers. You don't need a queen excluder. All you need is that bottom board, the deep, the frames, the inner cover, and the outer cover. That's all you're going to start with for especially the first few weeks. So receiving your bees, they can be started from a package. They might be from a nuke. They might be from an established colony you're doing a split from, or they might be a swarm that you caught and you're transferring over to your hive. So we'll talk about each one of these and how to obtain each one of those individually. So normally people starting out are going to start out with a package. That's probably the most common and ideal and recommended for beginning beekeepers. That's going to be the easiest for you guys where you don't probably have the experience of handling the swarms or but that seems to be the most affordable and best way for most people are going to get started is buying a 3-pound package of bees. Used equipment commonly carries pests, parasites, diseases, and contaminants into your brand new apiary, so be careful, make sure it's inspected. Don't be afraid to buy used equipment, just make sure that it's been checked out and don't just take somebody's word for it. Talk to the inspector, make sure that they know what they're doing. That is one of the jobs of the state apiarist. They will check all equipment. There's a big auction, a couple auctions in Iowa every year where they sell used equipment, and they have all that equipment inspected the morning of the auction, so you can be assured that it's all safe to be sold. Otherwise, if it's got any comb that they're suspicious of, they will not sell that during the auction. So you can do that and get used equipment. If you're buying it from a private individual, then you probably need to make arrangements several weeks in advance to have that equipment tested before you take it to your place. So we're going to talk about your pie in a package. Keep in mind it could be a 2-pound package, could be a 3-pound package. That's going to be totally up to you. I'm going to show you a couple different ways packages may come in. I'll switch cameras here real quick, and Rose has got a couple samples of, it may be a wood box like this, or it may be a plastic box, but I want you guys to be just kind of aware that there's several different options out there. So here's an example of the wood box with the can in it. You can see pretty clearly. There's that can right now is actually upside down, but I put it there so you can see the screen where that syrup water is going to drip out of. So, and then if she pulls that all the way out, you're going to see a little slit on the top of that box right there on the edge. And there's going to be a queen cage. And normally they'll have a piece of metal sticking out, stapled to it. And that queen cage will hang from that little clip right there. So that's where your queen's going to be in a package. So the other way you may see a package come is a plastic container. Pretty much everything's the same. It's got the can in it. It's got the little slot for the queen cage to stand in, just like the wood one did right there on both sides. That pops out, and then there's a slot on both sides. That queen cage could be hanging from either one. Now, one thing you need to keep in mind is just about everybody that sells packaged bees puts a deposit on that cage, and they want that cage back. So that's something you're going to have to take in place. There's the picture or the can that's got 3 holes in it where the sugar water is going to drip out of. So we'll go back to the slides here. So when you decide on what size package you're going to buy and where you're going to get them from, they're going to give you a date of when you can pick those bees up. Now, keep in mind, you're probably going to be one of several hundred people that could be arriving that same day to pick up your bees. So it could be mass confusion. I've went to places and picked up 1 cage. And I've also, a couple years ago, we went together as a group in a club and bought about 50 packages, and I went and picked them all up at one time. So that was interesting too. When you pick these packages up, keep in mind that they need to be kept in a cool, shady location. Now, it could also be the opposite. It may be a day that's actually pretty cool out and you want to keep them halfway warm. They can be traveled in a vehicle like this. However, you probably are going to have some stragglers that are attached to the outside of this box that are going to tag along. So it's very likely you could have bees flying around in your vehicle, especially once you get the heater on and warm it up and they start flying. They are perfectly fine on a trunk, provided it's not super hot here in Iowa. Down south, you probably wouldn't want to put them in a trunk, but around here, when we pick them up in the spring, generally it's cool enough, and sometimes it's even required to put them in the trunk to keep them warm enough. But just keep them located somewhere decent, temperature controlled, that it's not going to be one extreme or the other. If they get too wound up, if they get too hot, you can spray them with a little bit of 1,1 sugar water. This will keep them busy and cooled off because they're going to be starting to groom each other to take that sugar water off of them. And we'll actually talk about spraying the bees here in a little bit when we go to put them in the hive too. So if for some reason you happen to take a sharp corner and your sugar water can falls out, you could have a mess inside your car. So I always tell people, if you've never had a bunch of bees flying loose in the side of your vehicle, then you're probably not a true beekeeper or had them very long, because just about every beekeeper I've talked to has witnessed this at some point, whether they caught a swarm and put them in a box and tried to haul them in their vehicle or whatever. But I myself have been known to drive down the road many times with a bee suit on because I've got loose bees inside my vehicle. So something that could happen. So a lot of times what I do is I want to make sure, especially if I'm hauling just one box, that I have something to securely hold that box from flipping over, that package. If I buy 2 or 3, 4 packages, a lot of times they will take LAS and staple them together, so you've got kind of several of them stapled together. They're not going to fall over real easily, but securing that package is going to be one of the key in transports. So having your equipment ready, we talked about that, having it assembled in place and ready to go prior to the day you arrive. Now we're going to talk about things you're going to need. So you're going to have a single story hive. We talked about that, not having 2 deeps or the supers, just a single deep. You're going to want to have your hive tool. You're going to have a spray bottle of a 1,1 sugar syrup. You're going to have some sort of a bee veil, whether it's your suit, jacket, whatever type of veil you prefer. Your entrance reducer needs to be in, because these bees are going to be very timid to a new location. And it's basically thinking that as a house with a small door versus the whole side of the house open, trying to protect it. They want as small area as possible to protect, especially in a new place that they're not real comfortable in. You probably are going to have some sort of a hive top feeder or a way to feed them if you don't have a lot of comb in there right off the bat, or if you don't have a lot of honey in there right off the bat, which you probably aren't going to. Chances are, if you're a new producer, you're going to have just plain old frames with clean foundation and no comb whatsoever. So basically think of that as a house with no furniture. for these bees to feel comfortable, they're going to have to build comb, which is going to be like the furniture in the house, to feel comfortable on. They're not going to have any sort of honey in there. So you're going to have to give them a little bit of feed, which will be the sugar water, for a few weeks till they get stuff built up and get started. So I think what I want to do is I'm going to back up here. So when we talk about things you're going to need, the one thing I didn't really go over, and you've seen just a little bit ago, is what I carry to my bee yard every time I go. Now, this is going to be different for different people. I carry a lot of things that you may not need, but I never know if I'm going to be going to the bee yard or if I'm going to go be catching a swarm, or I'm going to get called that a guy's tearing down a house and he's got a hive in there that he needs to be cut out right away. So I keep everything in a package together. And we kind of talked about this a little bit last week of tools you're going to need for beekeeping. But what I'm going to do is switch over, and I want to discuss the bag that I bring with me to do all this in. Hopefully you guys can still hear me okay. So this bag is actually a lineman's bag that you can go to like Harbor Freight, and I think this bag was like $8. They're really cheap, just canvas bag. But I carry my bee brushes in here. I've got several Hive Tools. And like I said, most of my Hive Tools are painted. I've got orange, yellow, a couple blue ones. I even carry small ones. As most of you guys know, I'm pretty cheap. So I keep an eye out for, even like Menards. They had a 3-piece pry bar set for $5. Typically, these Hive Tools cost about $8 a piece. So when you can find deals like that, I pick them up as a kit. A couple of things that's always important when you go to the bee yard is you need some way of lighting your smoker tool. So I always carry backups. I've actually got, looks like 3 different lighters in here just in case. I've got plenty. This happens to be sawdust I picked up just from doing woodworking stuff. I carry newspapers, cardboard, all sorts of stuff to light the beehive or the smoker. Depending on what I'm going to get involved in, I may have my gloves with me, or I always carry some nitro gloves if it's going to be doing a cutout. Then I can just put the nitro gloves on. Here's one of the straps we talked about earlier, putting around the boxes. I may have to put, maybe I need to move a hive. I'll wrap it around the whole box and everything, pick it up, carry it away. May have to secure a lid that's blowed off. I've got that with me. I've got some extra tools in here that the guy doesn't have to have, but that's one to grab the frames. I can grab a frame just like that, pick it up and hold it. You don't have to have those, but they're handy to have sometimes. I've got extra queen boxes in here. I might be catching a swarm and find the queen. If I do, I've got a queen catcher in here. I can open that up, catch the queen, goes in there, put it in there. And then I've got extra queen cages. I can put her in the queen cage. And then I know I've got her secured. And I actually carry marshmallows with me. The marshmallows will go in the hole. We'll talk about that here in a little bit too. I've got clippers with me. If I'm catching maybe a swarm in a tree, I can cut the branch off and set the whole branch inside the hive. If I do catch a queen, I've got markers with me. I can mark her. Maybe I got some old comb I need to scrape off. I've got a big putty knife in here. So I've got pretty much all the tools I need for anything that could happen. I've got electrical tape and duct tape, and painter's tape if I need to wrap around the box, or there's maybe a crack right here that's air's coming in. I can put tape over it, or maybe if I want to tape off an entrance for a little bit, I can do that. I carry rubber bands with me when I'm doing cutouts. We'll talk about this later. I'll pop the foundation out. I carry a bread knife, serrated bread knife. I'll cut the comb out of the hive in the tree or the house or wherever it's at. Pop the comb in here. Take a rubber band and put around all this to hold the comb in place. And that secures it until the bees will actually fill in this voided area, and the rubber bands they'll rot off, or the bees will chew them off. And then actually you'll find the rubber bands laying outside the entrance. They'll carry those out once they get tired of them. So just a lot of different things. I try to keep everything on hand. I was telling Rose earlier, all this stuff is in this bag because at some point I've needed it and had to use it. So that's why it's all in here. And this bag is really nice and lightweight, and it's been a lot of places.
How is that likely? Okay, so guys, let's also be honest here. Scott is a little extreme on this. Let me tell you what I have in mind. It's super quick, super easy. I have a brush. I have a Hive Tool. I've got a lighter. I got some fuel. And when I'm going to check my hives and stuff, that's generally about all that I need right there. So this is one thing Scott and I fight about. We fully admit we are yin and yang when it comes to this stuff. And honestly, this is what I take to my bee yard with my smoker here, which I'm a little surprised that Scott does not have his smoker with him. So that is what I take. Now, when I have a swarm that I'm going to get, I have a bag similar to Scott's with still about half that stuff in it. But it's by the door and ready to go when I need it. So don't get overwhelmed and think that you have to go out and purchase everything in this bag. You literally, to start out, need that.
Okay, so you can see there's a lot of different tools that we do put in that bag, and you don't have, like Rose said, you don't have to carry them all. So the guys that have your video on, you still hear me okay? Just give me a nod of the head. Okay. I had some people call in saying they're having trouble connecting, so not sure what's going on with that, but we'll work on that here in a little bit. So you're going to mix up your sugar. Hopefully that's mixed ahead of time. So you have your sugar water 1-to-1 ratio, and you're going to have that in some sort of a sprayer. You're going to spray the outside of this cage through the screen. And like we said earlier, that will make the bees groom each other and keep them busy. Plus they won't be able to fly away. The last thing you want to do is get ready to put your bees in your hive and have them all fly away on you. So having that sugar water, some people use this, some people don't. A lot of this is going to be dependent on the weather the day you put your bees in the hive. If it's in the 30-40 degrees, obviously you don't want to spray those with sugar water. It's going to make them cold and they're going to have a hard time surviving. So here in Iowa, we just never know when those bees come in if we're going to have a 40-degree day or a 70-degree day. So it just depends on the weather on that situation. So typically once you spray them, your bees are going to be gathered up here close to that queen. So what you're going to want to do is just kind of tap it on the ground. Don't get too crazy with it because you're just going to agitate those bees. But tap it on the ground, take the cover out, and you're going to remove the feeder jar and the queen cage. Typically what you're going to do is grab that queen cage out and put the feeder jar back in, or cap it off or tape it or whatever until you figure out where you want to put that queen cage safely so you don't step on it. If you lose that queen cage or you lose your queen, you're going to be in trouble and have to get another one. So we remove the queen cage, make sure, first of all, she's alive. There's probably going to be a lot of bees around her. This is that wooden box with that metal spring or metal piece of metal on it. There's going to be a lot of bees trying to groom her and feed her through that opening in that queen cage. So place that cage in the box in your pocket if it's cold out, but place it somewhere secure that you're not going to lose it or step on it. Place the cover over the hole in the package so that these don't fly off again. And then the best thing is to move either 2 or 3 frames. Some people prefer the middle. That's usually what I do. Some people prefer the side. And then you're going to turn the box upside down and dump those bees in that opening. Give it a few taps. Some people prefer to take enough of the frames out of the deep to set the whole box in there. I prefer just taking a few frames out and dumping them right in there. And then if there's any bees remaining in the box, you can set it right in the front of the hive and they'll find their way to the hive. They're going to go to where that queen is at. So here's somebody just shaking the bees upside down, the box upside down to get all those bees. And they got a couple frames they've taken out here. And you can see the bees are going to build up. It's going to take them a while to disperse out on those frames. So you don't want to get in a hurry and just give them time. There again, here you can see where they've all clustered up on top. After they've dispersed, you're going to want to put those frames back into your hive. Now, this may be a few hours. This may be, you may want to come back in a day and put your frames back in. It all depends on how much time you're going to be in your bee yard. Maybe you've got several packages that you're putting in, so you've got time by the time you get to your last package and put it in. You can go back to the first hive and put those frames back in their place. Even if you have to leave one frame out for the day, it's not the end of the world. They're not going to build that much comb back in a day or two. You can always add the number 10 frame back in a couple days later after you come back to make sure that queen has escaped out of that box. So now we'll talk about the queen itself, because you also may have to leave that 10th frame out. When you go to put that queen box in there, sometimes you'll have enough room, especially if you have new frames, there's no comb to worry about. You'll have enough space to put those the queen box between those 10 frames. If you've got comb that's already existing, you may want to leave one frame out to give room for that queen box when you place that queen box in the center. So there's a couple different versions of cages, just like there's different versions of 8 frame, 10 frame, wood frames, plastic, everything else. This is what we've been showing you. It's a typical, what they call a California cage. It's a wooden box. It's got an opening with screen on one side, and there's a hole where the queen will come out. Typically, that's either got a cork in it, or it's got fondant or sugar candy or marshmallow in there to plug that up. This screen allows the other bees to feed the queen while she's in this queen cage. So that's why they can stay in that package box for a couple days. Is with that sugar water, the bees have access to food and they're going to feed that queen. So it's not going to hurt. I get a lot of calls every spring. Hey, the weather's going to be bad the day I pick my bees up. Can I wait 1 day, 2 days to put my bees in the box when it warms up? Sure. If you want to leave those bees in the garage or somewhere where it's warm and get past that bad weather, just make sure that can has plenty of sugar water in it. It's not going to hurt those bees to stay in there for a few days. It actually probably does them a little bit of good, because it's going to give them more time to build up and get used to the pheromones that queen's producing. You have to realize, if you bought this package of bees from somewhere, there's a really, really high percentage that queen is a new queen that's never been around those bees. A lot of times when you go to pick up that package of bees from the producer, they've gathered up their bees. They probably bought their queens from somewhere else and had them shipped in. And that queen just got introduced with those bees that morning that you went to pick them up. So a few extra days is not going to hurt, provided they have that sugar water can that's got food for them. So you've got a couple choices on how to release her. Regardless, when you get this queen box out, first thing you need to do is make sure the queen's alive. The second thing you need to do is look at this opening right here to see if there's a cork or if there's candy a marshmallow or some sort of sugar plugging that hole. If it's a cork and you put that in that hive that way, that queen is never going to come out of that box, and that's not what you want. So it's good to look and see what that is. You may have to remove the cork and put in some sugar candy, or you may have to put a marshmallow in there. But it's something to ask when you pick them up. It's a good idea to ask whoever you bought it from what they have and for a plug for the queen cage. Here's an example of a queen box. Here's that metal piece that will hang off the package, the hive or the package, 3-pound package box you buy. It is also very useful that you can bend that over to the end of a frame to hang that between 2 frames and just clip that metal over the end of the top. This is a plastic tube that has sugar candy inside of it. What happens is the bees will start eating their way through this. The queen may eat a little bit this way, but the worker bees will eat all the way through that tube. And once they do, that'll take usually anywhere from a day to 3 or 4 days. Then that queen will be released into the hive. That time that they take to eat the way through there is a time that they're giving the queen, allowed to get used to that queen and her pheromones where they bond. So it's not a bad thing for them to take a day or 2. Other versions of queen cages. There's the 3-hole cages, which is basically took a Forstner bit and drilled 3 holes, and they got a metal here on the end of it. But all of these at some point are going to have an opening that's either going to have a cork or sugar candy. But just make sure you're very careful when you go to remove that cork, because sometimes they pop out of there and the queen goes flying out, and you just lost a $35, $40 queen, and now you're going to go get a new one. It happens to somebody almost every year that gets packages. If you're going to do that, it's a good idea to maybe do that inside of some sort of a container that you can see, so if she does get out, she didn't really go anywhere. This is what they call a JZBZ cage. The only difference is it's plastic. Still has the opening right here that's going to have the sugar candy in there. It doesn't have the nice metal hook, but other than that, it's you treat it the same as you would any other queen cage. Here's a good picture. They're taking them out, putting them between the frames. Here you can see her between the frames. The important thing is to have this opening in the screen wire not facing up against the frame itself. See how it's facing the opposite direction? This way the worker bees can go up in here and feed this queen and take care of her so she has access to food. If you turn this a quarter turn and put it against the frame, then the workers can't access to the queen, and she may be dead by the time she gets out of there. Once the queen's in there, at that point you can cover them up and you can fill whatever feeder you got or put the feeder on top. But especially on a new frame, if I click back a page here, you can see these are all brand new foundation. There's no comb on this. There's no food in there. So if you have that situation, you're definitely going to have to feed those bees for a while before they take off and start bringing in the pollen to make their own honey, make their own comb. So good idea to feed them for a while. The rule of thumb for sugar, we'll go back here and talk about that. Typically when you get your bees, hopefully that's 50 degrees or above, we don't recommend feeding sugar water or anything under 50 degrees. It can get that way overnight, but when it's in the daytime, when it's under 50 degrees, feeding sugar water is probably going to make your bees sick. So you probably want to have some sort of sugar patty, which we'll talk about next week's session or the week after that. I'm not sure which one it is, but you're going to have your feeders ready to go. Typically when you're getting your bees, it should be warm enough. So you place the hive cover and leave them alone for a few days to get established, except the queen. After a few days, you're going to want to go back to your hive. You want to inspect to make sure that the queen's been released, that she's out of that cage, that by then they probably have built some comb. You may even see a few eggs by then. You want to make sure you added that last 10th frame if you hadn't done that already. You want to check your feeder to make sure you still got sugar water in it. Just a lot of things to check to make sure everything is going good. This will probably be one of the biggest inspections you ever do, because this will be the major inspection that's going to secure whether your bees are going to do well or not. So, but making sure that queen's out of there and that the bees have accepted her and she's doing her job, that's going to be your first sign, is that first inspection. So another way of obtaining bees is a nuke. You can buy a nuke box, which is typically, the only difference is you're buying bees that have 5 frames. They've already got comb, they've already got honey. It usually speeds things up a little bit. You would think that they'd really take off. It's about a 50-50 mix on which is better, packages or nukes. I've seen packages outdo nukes at the end of the year. The one advantage is it's like moving into a fully furnished apartment. The furniture's already there, the food's already in the fridge. That's kind of what a nuke is. They've got comb, they've got food, they're ready to go right off the bat. This is probably a little bit nicer for colder seasons, especially up north. That they've got plenty of food. So basically all what you do with these, are you're going to buy this nuke box. That there again is going to be your deposit. You're probably going to take back, unless they have a cardboard one that you buy outright. You're going to pick these frames up and you're going to put them right in the hive. You're going to have 5 empty frames there. Take these 5 full frames and put them right in there. The disadvantage of this is your queen is probably going to be loose on one of these frames. So as you pick them up, you're going to have to be very careful that you don't smash her or roll her off and injure her in any way when you go to put these in there. So this one probably takes a little bit more delicacy of putting the bees in, being nice and slow. If you've never handled bees before, this can be a little intimidating, and it may want to have somebody help you with that. But this is basically ready to go packaged bees. Price wise, you're looking at about $130 to $150 for a 3-pound package. Right now, nukes are probably anywhere from $160 to $180. They cost a little bit more because you're getting 5 frames of brood and comb and honey already in there. You probably aren't getting quite as many bees, but in the long run, you're going to have more because there's eggs in all those frames too. So you got to take that in consideration. Another way to get bees is to catch a swarm and put the swarm in your hive. So we'll talk more in detail about swarms and why they do it and where to find them and how to trap them. I think that's next week's session. But basically all I'm going to talk about tonight is, let's say you find a swarm and you want to put it in your beehive. If it's something like this, it's a little bit harder. This was actually a picture I took a swarm off of a semi-trailer that was in the truck stop at Pilot parking lot. So that took a little bit more work than just finding one like this on a branch that you can shake off into a box and shut the lid and go home. Typically, when bees swarm, they're swarming because they've either outgrown their home or for some reason they didn't like where they lived. And when they swarm, they're going to take the old queen with them, and they're going to want to take as much food and everything that they can eat and travel with, because they don't know when they go to their new place whether or not there's going to be anything there. So the reason you're able to stick your hand into a swarm like this is normally the bees have engorged themselves with so much honey and wax that they are so full they can't sting you, basically. All they're thinking about is getting to that new place. So this is why you'll see people that they're able to go up and stick their hand right into the swarm. They're usually pretty docile at this point because they're just so engorged with all that honey. If you're able to find one on a small branch, I mentioned having the clippers in my bag. You can just clip that branch off and take the whole thing and put it right in your box. It's about as easy as it's going to get. You may have to shake them off into a bucket. The key is getting the queen. If you know what to look for and can find the queen and put her in a queen cage, that's even better. If you can thump them into a box like this, if you're not able to cut the branch off, chances are you're probably going to get that queen in that box. But if you set the box down for a little bit and the bees start going to it, you're going to know that that queen's in there. Sometimes you get in a situation like this where you got to be more delicate removing the bees. People don't want their property damaged. You may have to have a bee vac. We'll talk more about that next week too. But that's an easy way of getting the bees removed off of something in this situation. Here are several different types of bee vacs. Some of these are homemade off of a shop vac. Basically what this is, and this one here is kind of a prime example. You have some sort of a power vac that's going to have the suction. The suction is going to come into a chamber that has a filter through it. Then this hose comes out, and this is where you'll suck the bees into. They'll go in, and there's going to be some sort of a screen here that stops the bees from being sucked into the vacuum. And then you just open this up and take the bees out and dump them into your beehive. So in this situation here, here's the screen. If we was meeting in person, I could show you the one I have that I've made that works out really nice. Maybe that'll be something we do this spring. But there's several different types of bee vacs, but they're real handy for catching swarms or doing cutouts like right here where they're cutting a hive out of a wall of an old barn or something. So if you get to that point, bee vac is recommended. You can also trap bees so that when they swarm, you try to put up some sort of container to entice them in. We'll talk more about that next week too. Typically, you're using lemongrass oil. That is one of the closest natural oils that smells like the pheromones the queen produces. The higher you can get that trap or that container in the tree, the better. Usually check them about once a week, because in a week's time, they can pretty much fill that up when they move in. That's one of the things I really enjoy doing is catching swarms and trapping swarms. You can be pretty successful if you know what you're doing and how you do it. We'll talk more about that and the techniques of it next week. So once you get the swarm caught, whether you cut it off a branch or whatever, you're basically just shaking them right down into the hive. Hopefully the queen drops down there and you let them settle down just like you would if you're dumping a package in there. I've even seen this done it myself a few times. You can put a light colored cloth up to the entrance and dump them in front of it. And just the smell of the hive, usually they'll almost parade right into that. We did a cutout a few years ago right here in front of the office, and we showed people how this worked. It's pretty slick. If you're catching swarms, it's good to have a queen catcher and a queen cage like I talked about earlier, my toolbox I have there. If you can find that queen and catch her, then the rest of those bees are not going to go anywhere except for where she goes. If you catch that queen, put her in your box, put her in the hive, set that hive down there with the top open or the entrance open, all those bees are going to fly into that box just like a parade because they want to get to that queen. I've caught a lot of swarms where maybe like on that semi or something where it's hard to get them into the box. You can actually dig through there if you know what you're doing, look to find the queen, catch her, and she'll do the job for you because she'll make all those bees come right into the box for you. Types of feeders, we talked a little bit about this last week, but you can have a pail feeder, a hive top feeder like this one, maybe a division board feeder, the Boardman feeder, which is out front. We talked about how we didn't really recommend these because it's out front and might increase the robbing, especially on a new hive. They're not going to have the bouncers at the front door ready yet to protect themselves and feel comfortable. The one thing we probably didn't talk too much about is when you have your bees in your hive, regardless of how you get them, put your entrance reducer on the smallest opening. Give them the smallest hole possible to protect from intruders. So we'll talk a little about feeding bees now. One thing about bees is you always need to stay ahead of them in your thinking. Don't ever let them think that they're getting short on food. Once bees get it in their mind that they're running short on food, they're more apt to swarm. And once they get swarming on their mind, they're really hard to change their mind. So stay ahead of them, make sure they always have enough food. Top feeders are the easiest and best for low temperatures and small colonies to feed. You can put a lot of sugar water in there. Division board feeders can move a lot of food quickly, but you have to open the hives up to get to those division board feeders, but they will keep your colony strong. And don't overlook protein patties for the colony as well, especially in colder weather. You may have to feed the winter patties or the protein patties instead of the sugar water, but something else you can do both if you need to.
If you're starting out with a new hive, I recommend protein patties.
Yeah, especially new hives, like Rose just said, that it's good to have protein patties in there because they're not going to have that stuff build up in their hive already because everything's brand new. So the bees need food at all times, prevents starvation, stimulates food production, fuels wax production, and combs construction. They're going to choose whether they want the sugar water or they'd rather go out and get the nectar from the plants. You typically will hardly ever see bees choosing sugar water over the real thing. They're going to go out, and if there's dandelions out there and there's going to be some of the spring trees are going to be blooming, they will rather have that than the sugar water. Typically in Iowa, we get a time usually about mid-March to early April when the temperatures are going to be above 50 degrees in the daytime and the bees are going to want to fly, but there's just nothing out there for them to really go get for pollen nectar. So until the dandelions bloom, there's kind of that little dearth area that there's not much out there and you really need to feed them. That is about the only time I personally put feed out because most of my hives are strong enough to get through the winter. I don't have to supplement too much of them, but I really watch them in that February, March area because most hives are going to be lost that time of year because they've ran out of food, the weather's getting warm, and there's nowhere to get more food out there. So you really have to keep an eye on them. But the point of this comment here is at some point, they're going to start deciding they don't want that sugar water. So when you go out there to refill it and it's full, they're telling you that they've got other choices out there they'd rather have. So at that point, you can start lessening the sugar water you feed them and maybe quit completely. There again, feed your hive until the bees tell you to stop, that they don't want any more. So honey is the ideal option, of course, but don't use other people's honey because you could be spreading disease that way. Sugar water in the springtime, you're going to have a 1-to-1. That's going to be sugar to water. I don't know why it did that. In the fall, you're probably going to feed a 2-to-1, 2-part sugar to 1 part water by volume. Corn syrup can be used. Pollen substitute patties can be used. All these can be used for feed for the bees. I have fed some of my own honey back sometimes if I get in a pinch where maybe I had a lot of honey that I didn't get sold, or my honey got crystallized and I didn't want to sell it, or for whatever reason, maybe I had some left over from hives that died out that I wanted to spread out that I could share that honey. I have used that. Sugar water, I use a lot of. I don't use much corn syrup. That's usually your big producers that are buying it in the big 55-gallon barrels or the big totes and feeding their bees that way with it. But I do use pollen substitute patty, especially starting up to wanting to get brood production going. So here's some recipes for feeding bees. I also have these in handouts that I can email out if you guys would like those. For sugar recipes, the 1 part sugar, 2 parts water, used in the spring. Stimulate egg laying, use only when enough honey available for feeding the brood. You can use 1 pound sugar to 1 quart water, or I don't know why this says 1 to 2. It should be 1-to-1. 5 pound sugar to 5 quarts of water. And it doesn't seem like much water, but when you mix it up, it'll get all that sugar dissolved. So using warm water is usually a lot easier because it dissolves the sugar better. Okay. So this 1 to 2 parts, that is for the fall time. That's why it's on here. So the 1-to-1 in the sugar that we're going to feed in the springtime, that's going to encourage comb building. That's 1 pound. Same thing, sugar. You can also make sugar syrup. This is going to be when it's colder weather out. Used usually in the fall or the winter time. And it's 1 pound to 1 cup. And you would not think you could dissolve 1 pound of sugar to 1 cup of water, but it does mix up that way. And you get kind of this clumpy, almost like a pasty thing, but the bees love to use it. You can either do it 2 different ways. You can heat the water up and mix it up, or you can do it cold way and just don't heat the water up. Mix it up with a mixer of some sort. I use a paint mixer and mix it up that way. I've even got a recipe I use in the wintertime to make patties that is 1 cup of water to 5 pounds of sugar. So you can dissolve a lot of sugar in a little bit of water. If you're boiling this, you're going to bring the water to a boil, stir in the sugar, remove from heat and cool it down. Never feed hot sugar to them. Make sure it's always cool to room temperature. Each gallon of syrup increases the colony's reserves by about 7 pounds. If you're making sugar candy, this is going to be more like your fondant. You're going to use a 4-pound bag of sugar. 8 cups equals a 4-pound bag. You're going to mix that with 2 cups of water. Or if you're going to use a 5-pound recipe of sugar, that's 10 cups or and 2.5 cups of water. So depending on what size bag of sugar, I put both of them on there because you have to watch. Some places will sell 4-pound bags of sugar. Other places sell 5-pound bags of sugar. So make sure you know what you have. Usually what I do is I mix this up and then I will take either a paper plate or baking dish or casserole dish, line it with some parchment paper and pour that mixture in there and pack it down, and you can make sugar cubes out of that. And I can get you all these printouts sent to you if you'd like. So once the bees start producing comb, that's going to be the foundation that they're going to lay the eggs in. And then your bees are going to start going out when the dandelions bloom. We always say once dandelions blooming, that is bee season. That's when you can start working your hives, rearranging the hives. We'll talk more about that next week. And that's when you know there's going to be food available for your bees. Dandelions are blooming, they have food available. The bees are going to be out looking for water. So then I wanted to talk about, we've talked about getting the bees, we talked about putting them in the hive, we've talked about what they're going to be looking for when spring comes around as far as food and water. But now the thing I kind of want to concentrate a little bit again is going back and talking about what type of bees to look for when you're buying your bees. We're not going to get too much into the genetic genotypes and all that, but just wanted to kind of give you an idea that the genetics of the bees are no different than if you're buying a good genetic bloodline for cattle or horses or anything else. That queen is the #1 thing that you need to be looking at when it comes to the genetics, because all of her offspring are going to have half of her genetics in there. Now, she may have bred with 10 different drones and she may have 10 different genetics from them, but 50% of her stuff is going to go out and be from her. So that's one of the main things to look at, is where that queen is coming from. So some of the genetic traits they look for in honeybees could be the gentleness or excitability, how you can handle them, how aggressive they're going to be. Are they Varroa mite resistance? Obviously, they're not going to be completely resistant, but they may have some genetic capabilities where they groom themselves more often than others to have that trait to chew those mites off themselves. They might have tracheal mite resistance. They might be resistant to various diseases such as chalk brood, American foul brood. We'll talk more about these diseases the very last week of classes. The population dynamics is, how quick do they respond and reproduce and build their colonies up? Are they good at overwintering? Not prone to excess swarming. Some are going to be aggressive and want to swarm all the time, and you're not going to get much production out of a hive like that. Does their honey ripen fast, or do they produce honey quickly? Does it dry down quickly? Are their honeycomb cappings are white? And then how much propolis are they use? Are they going to glue everything down where you can't hardly move anything out of that box? So depending on what you're doing, you may want a little bit of all this. Now, obviously, you can't go out to the grocery store and pick out the queen that's going to have the best genetic traits that you want, but you can look at some of the things that, for instance, I look at wintering ability. If your bees cannot survive over the winter, then they're not going to be much value to you because you're going to get one season out of them and that's it. So having said that, I look for producers that are making queens that have either already survived an Iowa winter or come from queens that have survived Iowa winters. So I'm looking at queen producers like Ellen Bell that's up in Runnels, Iowa. I'm looking at the gentleman up in Indianola, Jason Foley. Those guys are going to have stock that comes from genetics that have overwintered in Iowa and been successful doing that. If you're buying queens from big producers that are shipping them in from California, you don't know what their genetic capabilities are for overwintering. There again, you can go up to Ellen's place and she's going to have really gentle bees because she doesn't put up with bees that get, wound up and get aggressive. So that's going to be a good thing if you want to handle them easily. If some cases, some people like aggressive bees because they're more mite resistant. That's kind of what the Russian bees, sometimes they're a little bit more aggressive toward the mites themselves. Maybe not toward the people that handle them, but to the mites themselves. Maybe you want to go with the Russian genetics. So the other thing you're going to have is, regardless of, in my opinion, regardless of the species of bee you go with, whether it's an Italian, Carnelian, Russian, whatever, you can take the same breed and have different variances in each one of them. I've had most of my bees now are what I call just the Heinz 57. They've either been from swarms or cutouts or splits. I have some bees that outproduce others. And so when I do my splits, or if I produce queens, I do it out of those boxes that I prefer, that handle well, that I know have overwintered several seasons. That's where I'm going to take my genetics from. So that's what you need to be talking to your producers and asking them those questions. I can't stress this enough. I'm highly against people going out and buying from these big box stores and getting 3-pound packages of bees. And those bees may be coming from Florida or California or whatever, and may not have the hardiness that you want to have in Iowa winter. Maybe they're used to surviving in California or Florida, but they aren't going to be able to handle an Iowa weather. You have to realize that here in the Midwest, we have 100-degree days, and right now we're having about -10-degree days. So our weather drastically changes, and you need to have a genetic that's going to be able to handle that. So I'll get off my soapbox on that, but just something for you guys to be aware of and to ask those questions regardless of where you're buying your bees from. So some of the most common types of bees, obviously we talked about, we have Carnelians, the Italians, the Russians. You might have Minnesota hygienics, the African honeybees, that's more for down south. But know that some of their traits have been bred into some of the northern bees, just may be more aggressive. Now, obviously, African honeybees are not going to survive in these northern climates, but some of the genetics, regardless of where you're getting your queens from, may have a touch of this in their genetics. So now we're going to switch gears again, and we're going to talk about smoker. Why do you smoke them? How to smoke them? How do you keep your smoker lit? How to get it started? This is going to be something that you learn, is going to be your right hand when it comes to beekeeping. You should always have a smoker with you. Don't ever think that you can just pop the hive open, do a quick check, and get away with it, because the bees will remind you real quickly that they don't approve of I can tell you from experience, I've tried it many a times and it does not work. I usually regret it every time. So why do you smoke them? There's different theories about what the smoke actually does to the bee. Does it disorient them? Does it calm them? Does it irritate them? It will confuse them just a little bit, in my opinion. It makes them go deeper into the box. They seem to want to get away from it. Part of the theory is that it disguises the pheromone, so they don't know where exactly to go. It disorients them a little bit. But regardless of what it does, how it does it, it will be your right-hand tool because it will take the bees' aggressiveness away. When bees sting you, they leave a pheromone to tell other bees where to sting. One of the first things you should do if you get stung is to smoke that area. It will cover those pheromones up and you won't have other bees getting agitated and wanting to sting you as well. As far as what to burn, I prefer cardboard or wood chips. I know some people use pine needles. They may use burlap bags. They may use sisal twine. Do not use the plastic twine in it. It will harm your bees. But there's a lot of different things you can use as far as fuel to burn. What I usually tend up doing is I will take some cardboard and rip it strips and put in the smoker and then light a napkin or a paper towel or something that's easily quick to light. Stick it in there to get the cardboard going and then just pack that thing as full as I can of cardboard. And we actually had a competition out here one time at the bee club. We had everybody use different fuels that they preferred and they got to pack them however they wanted. We lit them. We came inside, went back out about a half hour later to see how many of them were still going. And none of them were being pumped or anything. They're all just sitting there side by side. And the one that was packed with cardboard actually was still burning. It was the only one still lit, I think. There was maybe one more with, can't remember what else it had in it, but the cardboard actually lasted long as anything else. Regardless of what you use, whatever you have available, maybe you're into woodworking, you got a bunch of wood chips or wood shavings, that'll be fine too. Maybe you have a yard with a bunch of cedar trees and you've got a bunch of needles there you can burn easily. Whatever it is, keep plenty of it, keep it dry. Tightly packed is good. You want a white smoke. It shouldn't be anything that's hot coming out of there. It's just a white smoke that has hardly any temperature to it at all. If you should be able to hold your hand up in the smoke and not feel heat, but that'll be the best type of smoke you can have. Starting and keeping a smoker lit is going to be one of the probably things you'll practice the most in beekeeping, because it's one thing you're always going to want to have is matches or some sort of a lighter, because you'll have to relight it sometimes. So now you're talking about working the bees. You're going to have your veil on. You want to make sure your smoker's lit. Make sure you've got a hive tool. Where the appropriate weather conditions. This is important because if it's cloudy out, if it's windy out, if it's rainy out, the bees are going to want to stay inside the hive. Hot, bright, sunny days are the best time to go check your hive. The best time, in my opinion, is on a nice sunny day, anywhere from about 2 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Most of your bees are going to be out foraging out in the fields. If you've got a nice healthy hive that may have 30 to 50,000 worker bees in there, if half of them are out in the field flying around and getting pollen, that means that's half the hive you have to worry about messing with, and you've got a better chance of looking at things. The frames won't be quite as full. You'll be able to find the queen easier, look for eggs easier. So you're going to open that up. You're going to have a few puffs of smoke at the entrance when you first get there. Then you're going to lift the top cover up. You're going to give a few more puffs of smoke, and that's going to help drive the bees down into the frames a little deeper. Then you're going to take the inner cover off, probably smoke some more. And when you're working these bees, you want to be confident and deliberate in your movements. This is where you want to be slow and steady. Anything fast, banging around is just going to agitate the bees. Don't block the front of the hive. If you're standing in front of the hive, that's their pathway they're flying in and out of. The whole time you're looking at that hive, there's going to be bees coming and going. So it's best to either stand to the side or stand in the back, and that way you're not going to upset them by being right in front of it. Some people get carried away with smoke, and I've seen bees that will get aggressive when they're heavily smoked too much. You don't need a lot. I have a few hives that I don't hardly smoke at all, just because of they're not aggressive. They're very easy to handle. They're docile. So I may smoke once or twice at the front of the hive, give them 1 or 2 puffs when I pick the lid off. And after that, I don't have to really smoke them that much, as long as I stay calm and just slow my movements. Your Hive Tool is going to be your best friend, and I guarantee you at some point you're going to lay it down, and then you're going to need it and be looking for it. So be very aware of where that Hive Tool is at all time, because that is your right hand when it comes to that. That and the Hive Tool and the smoker are the 2 things that you're going to need the most when you're checking your bees. We talked about lifting the frame slowly. When you pull the frames out, do it slow. You can actually roll your bees, meaning you get them caught between a couple frames in the comb. You can kill your queen doing this if you do it too fast, so be slow with that. The sooner you can check them and get out of there, the better you are, depending on what you're looking for. A lot of times I'll open my hive up. We'll talk about hive inspections more detailed here next week, but when you open that up and you see your nice bunch of bees in there number wise, you pull the frame up, you see fresh eggs, you know that queen's been there in the last day or 2. At that point, there's not a whole lot to worry about. You put everything back and get out of there. You know your queen's there, the bees are doing good, they're reproducing, they've got stuff coming in for honey and for food. They're making plenty of honey. You don't have to spend all day in there going through them. You're just going to agitate them and make them more aggressive. So, $1 million question, how often should you inspect your hives? Obviously, if you just put them in there, you're going to want to inspect them for probably 3 days after you put them in, then maybe once a week for a couple of weeks after that. You're going to get a lot of different answers on this. I know some people, once they know what they're doing and what to look for, they may only inspect their hives once a month. They may only inspect their hives a couple times a season. It all depends on what your role is. If you're producing honey, if you're just having them to have them, if you're pollinating flowers or fields, what type of equipment you're using. If you're using 10 frame deep boxes and you're putting deeps on for honey supers, you don't have to check them near as often as if you're putting shallows on. So typically it's what you put into it's what you're going to get out of it. But you need to know what's going on in there. And like we said earlier, you need to be ahead of them, because if you don't check them and something goes wrong and they decide to leave, it's probably going to be too late by the time you get back in there. So make sure you're 1 step ahead of them. Swarm prevention, I'm looking for them supering or looking for the swarm cells. And then if they need to add more boxes to super up to make honey production, as long as they don't ever think they're running out of room, you're probably going to stay ahead of them by adding more supers. They're probably not going to swarm on you. But as soon as they feel like they're getting crowded, they may start making queen cells to swarm on you. And if they get to that point, it's probably too late. So make sure you always use that 7-10 rule. Once they fill up 7 frames, you add another box on. Typically, I tell people you may inspect every 10 days, you may inspect every couple weeks. There again, just knowing what you're looking for. New beekeepers always seem to inspect their hives more often because they want to see what's going on in there. Some of the producers, like I said, that's been doing it for a while, they may only inspect them every 2, 3, 4 weeks even. So what are you looking for each time you inspect them? Number 1, you want to see if that queen's present or lack thereof. Are you seeing eggs? If you've got eggs and you know that queen's been there in the last day or 2. If you're not seeing eggs and you know most of the brood is capped off and you don't see larvae, then maybe she's not been there for a while, or maybe you've got something going on, there's a disease or something that queen doesn't feel comfortable and they swarmed on you. Maybe your numbers went down. You're looking for all that stuff. Do you see any parasites? Do you see any signs of disease? A lot of this section here, pest, parasites, and disease, we'll go into detail the very last week of class on all those symptoms and what to look for. Are they overcrowding? Do you need to add supers? Are they running out of room? Is their food supply getting short? Do they not have much capped honey? The numbers, when they start going down, you're going to see something going on very obviously. Typically, we recommend, if you can, to have 2 hives side by side. That way you compare what's going on. Sometimes you don't realize your numbers are going down until you look at your other hive and see how well it's doing. Basically, you're just looking for the general strength, health, vigor of the colony. The numbers are good. The food's coming in. They're building up new hives, new comb, new frames. As long as everything's going in that direction, then you're in good shape. So what you're looking for is these little rice-looking things in the center of a cell. Once you see that, then you know your queen's been there within the last 24, 48 hours, because those eggs aren't going to be any older than that. If you see larvae like this, then she's been there within the week. If you see a cell that's got 2 eggs per cell, then you know that instead of a queen laying eggs, you've got a worker laying eggs. And that's a whole nother situation we'll talk about later. So this is a picture of young larvae. Oh, let me go back. So that young larvae is probably just about 3-4 days old. It's past that egg stage. It isn't quite the bigger stage. It looked like the maggots. It's that in-between stage. This is the larvae stage. And now they're getting to the point that it's starting to be capped brood. When you see this, you should see a lot of it. Typically, it's going to be in a football pattern, just like this. It's going to be a long oval football pattern, and this is going to be the brood right here. So on the outer edge up here is the honey that's capped off. It's going to fill in the corners on the outside of the football. And this down here, these cells that are poking out, that's going to be your drone cells, and that's where your males are going to hatch from. So that is a really nice frame right there with a lot of brood. You're in the pattern of it's really nice. See how it's all filled in here? There's a few empty spots where they've already hatched out, and the adults of the bees have hatched out of there. They've been fully matured. So that's just a real nice brood pattern. We talked about the drone at the bottom, and then the honey across the top and along the edges. So we're just going to look at a lot of pictures here so you get that idea. A lot of brood around the edge. Probably just starting honey production. So let me go back here. So just by this picture alone, I would probably say you're looking at late spring, probably early to late spring. You've got good brood buildup. They're getting ready to hatch, but I don't see a lot of honey coming in yet. So, whoops. So the honey's probably flow is not quite started. They've just got a few corners filled up with honey there, but that also depends on what box they're in. They may have moved on up and starting to fill up the honey higher up yet too. So here's a frame out of a hive top feeder, but there again, you still have that football shape of good brood. You know that she's laying good pattern there. A little bit of capped honey. This white caps up here is the honey. So that just kind of tells you what you're looking for. If you could look real close, you might even see some eggs down here in these cells on the edge that she's laid in. If you're looking real close, you might even be able to see a queen in here. So I don't get too carried away with looking for the queen itself. As soon as I find a frame that has an egg on it, and then I know that she's been there in the last 24, 48 hours, I'm not too worried about finding that queen. I'm not really going to gain a lot of knowledge by finding her because I already know she's there because I've seen eggs. So we went through, looks like about an hour and 40 minutes of class. Talked about a lot of different things. Is there any questions you guys have? I know I went through it pretty quick, but we kind of just covered everything you needed to know for getting your bees and putting them in the boxes and what to look for.